이번 세션을 진행해 주실 분은 바로 에버노트의 리빈 CEO님이십니다. 에버노트는 더 이상 말이 필요 없는 전 세계 최고의 생산성 노트 어플리케이션이죠. 에버노트는 이제 벤처 회사를 넘어서 글로벌 개발자와 벤처들 간의 생태계 구축을 위한 엑셀러레이팅 프로그램을 진행한다고 발표한 바 있는데요. 오늘 에버노트의 리빈 대표님께서는 100년의 스타트업이 되는 방법이라는 주제로 좋은 말씀 전해드릴 예정입니다. 자, 그러면 에버노트의 리빈 대표님 모셔볼까요? 여러분 큰 박수로 환영해 주시기 바랍니다.
Thank you. Hi. I am Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be back in Seoul. It's always great being here. I try to come as often as I can, at least a couple of times a year, mostly for the food, really. I'm really just here to eat. But it was because of my great love of Korean food that actually made us want to open up an office here and really have as much of a presence in Korea as possible. So this is actually my first tip to inspiring entrepreneurs. It's just go where the food is best. And you're already off to a good start if you're here in Seoul. So we're trying to build a 100-year startup. Let's see if my remote works. Oh, there we go. I get asked a lot because we keep talking about this idea of building Evernote as a 100-year startup. And so I get asked a lot about, how are we going to do it? And the short answer, of course, is I don't know. I don't know exactly. We have a 100-year plan. We've only been around for 5 years, so we're about 5% done. We have a progress bar in the office that says installing 100-year startup, 5%. But we have some ideas about how we can try to do it. But ultimately, I think the real question is why try to build a 100-year startup? And that's the more interesting way of looking at it. And the reason is because if you're going to do a startup, if you're going to build your company, you put your whole life into it. For as long as it lasts, it's your life's work. It becomes the most important thing to you. And if you're going to invest this much time and effort, this much of your own life to build something, you may as well try to make something permanently great. Evernote is my third startup, and many of the same people who were with me at Evernote were co-founders of my previous startups or had companies of their own. And in all of our previous companies, we were always building for somebody else. We were always building products for somebody else, for other customers, and then we sold both companies. So we were even building the companies for somebody else. And it took us 2 times to learn, and we said by the third time, by the time we were getting ready with Evernote, we said the third time around, let's just do it for ourselves. Let's only build the products that we want to use, and let's build a company that we want to keep. And so we decided a 100-year startup is the goal. And of course, the goal here isn't just to be a 100-year company. We don't just want to be 100 years old. We still want to be a startup 100 years from now. We still want to be a company that people are just as much in love with in 100 years as they are now, a company that's quick, a company that's still innovative. And so we spent a lot of time thinking, when does a company stop being a startup and become something worse? And we think we have some ideas, and we have some ideas about how we can avoid it and how we can build for the next 95 years. So I think the first step in trying to build a 100-year startup is to have a sufficiently epic goal. Building a startup, being an entrepreneur is like being on a quest. You're on a quest. You need to convince other people, your co-founders, your investors, your customers, your partners. You need to inspire other people to go on your quest with you. And the first step is to have a suitably epic quest, to have something important enough that you're doing. You have to ask yourself, if you have a company, you have to ask yourself, why are you building this? In fact, that's more important than the question, what are you building? When I talk to a lot of young entrepreneurs, when I'm going to go see a lot of the people out in the demo area right now, most of them are going to start by telling me what they're building. The what is actually the second question. It's more important to ask, why are you building this? Why does your company deserve to exist? Why is the world a little bit better because your company's in it than if it wasn't in it at all? if the reason you're building a company is just to make money, if the why is, well, because I think there's a good market for this and I want to make money, that's not a very good reason to devote your whole life to. And that's going to make your goal, that's going to make your quest less interesting, less epic, and you won't be able to attract as many people to go along in this crazy adventure with you. So the first step is to have a good goal. The goal of Evernote is to make the world a little bit smarter. We make a second brain. We really think of our products as being your second brain because no one is happy with their only brain. So our goal is to make the world a little bit smarter, one person at a time. And we think that's sufficiently epic to drive a 100-year quest. But the real danger in not being able to build a long-term company is to have conflict of interest, to have different threads of your business that pull in different directions so that everything becomes tangled up and pulled apart. And so a real strategy is to try to align all of these different threads over time. And the threads are all different things. You can see there's things that the founders of a company want, things that the employees want, things that customers want, and investors, and community, and partners. And in many businesses, all of these desires pull in opposite directions. In fact, many companies are started around exploiting the conflict of interest in these different threads, because it's the conflict of interest that lets you make short-term money. So if you have your users that want one thing, but your advertisers want something else, and your investors want a third thing, you can translate that conflict into short-term revenue. But the real danger is that that conflict builds up and builds up over time, and before you know it, it can destroy the company, or it can destroy the culture of the company. So our main focus at Evernote is alignment. We want to take all of these threads, which are usually pulling in different directions, and we want to, through careful work, align them over time. And you can kind of see where we are right now. I think we're right at the point where things are just starting to align, and we still have 95 years to go, hopefully in full alignment. And this is really the model that I want to talk about. So the first step in alignment, the first step in aligning interests, is to have a simple and direct business model. When I talk to entrepreneurs, when people pitch me their ideas, very often I hear very, very complex business models. And I have a rule of thumb about this. If your business model is more complicated than your product, if you spend more time thinking about how you're going to make money than you've spent about what your actual product is, then I think your priorities are wrong. I think your energy really ought to be focused on making a great product, making a great experience, and the business model needs to be as absolutely simple as possible to avoid these conflicts of interest. So at Evernote, we have a very, very simple business model, which is I think the best business model available. I think if you can pull this business model off, that's all you should do. Our Evernote business model is basically simple. Our goal is to make great products and have people pay for them. And that's it. That's our strategy. We want to make something great. We want to make something good enough that people will pay money for. We don't want to go through any additional complexity. Ultimately, the Evernote business model works in 3 steps. When I do fundraising, when I present our financials, when I present our business model, I basically show 3 slides that explain this. So these are the 3 slides that I use with all my investors. So Evernote business model step number 1 is more and more people sign up. This shows over time how many people are signing up for Evernote. We have more than 50 million users now worldwide, almost 2 million in Korea. I think closing in on 60 million total any day now. And more people just sign up all the time. And this is organic. We don't pay for any user acquisition. We don't do advertising. We don't have any tricks. We have a no-tricks business model. We just try to make a good product and have people tell their friends to sign up for it. So over time, more and more people sign up. That's step 1. Now this chart, every successful internet company has a chart that looks exactly like this. It's not unique to Evernote. Pretty much everyone in Silicon Valley has something that looks just like this. I'm glad we have one too, but it's not enough. It's not enough of a business model just to show people, but it's nice to be able to show. So step 2, and this gets more interesting, this shows that more people stay. This chart shows the percentage of users that start with Evernote that over time keep coming back to it. And this is what we call the smile chart, because it makes me happy. But it is also a little bit more unusual than the first chart. This shows that people start using Evernote, and then over the next couple of months, they fall away. Ultimately, we'll only wind up having about maybe 35, 40% of the people who start using it still using it a few months later. But then over time, they actually come back. Right? So the longer you've stayed away from Evernote, the more you miss it, the more you want to come back to it. So over time, you actually see users returning. In technical financial terms, we have negative churn. It means that the longer we run the company, the more people that used to use it come back to us. This is the second step. So step one is more people sign up. Step two is more people are sticking around. This chart, if you have, really shows that you have a product that people become attached to. Many companies don't have a chart like this. Their chart for retention rate just keeps going down. So people will start using the product, but then they stop over time. This is true of a lot of games, of a lot of things that bring you a lot of value in the beginning, but then you kind of get bored with. The whole goal of Evernote was we wanted to make it more valuable the longer you used it. And I encourage you to think about your products the same way. Try to make something that becomes more valuable to your customers the longer they use it. And if you can do that, I think you can have this kind of retention chart. And then step three is more people pay. So this shows the percentage of people that pay for Evernote Premium depending on how many months they've been using it. Again, the idea is to make it more valuable as time goes on. So in the first month, very few people pay. Less than 0.5% of people pay for Evernote in their first month. But after 5 years, we have about 5 years of data now, our oldest users are about 25% of them are paying us currently. So the longer you use it, the more valuable it is, the more you pay. So that's the business model. It's very simple. It's direct. It doesn't rely on advertising. It doesn't rely on data mining. It just relies on making a product that people will pay money for, even if they don't have to. And that leads to Evernote with our most important observation, which is it's more important that you stay than that you pay. Right? We want people to stay around and to use Evernote every day for the rest of their lives. And when we look at someone, when we look at a person, we say, we have the rest of your life to make money from you. If you can keep coming back, we have the rest of your life to make money from you. We don't need to try to squeeze it in the beginning. And it's that kind of mentality. It's saying we're not trying to sell you anything. We're not trying to put any pressure on you. We want to give you all the time in the world to fall in love. And if you do, we have the rest of your life to make money from you. That's what works out really well. And I contrast that with a lot of other approaches that try to figure out how to make money right away, right from the beginning, through things like advertising or selling data or things like that. The main thing that we realized is that people love to buy things. People actually like to pay for things. They just hate feeling that they're sold to. So if you can give people a beautiful experience and you never push them, you never pressure them to pay, they'll actually pay quite a lot. But as soon as you actually push them to do it, then you start losing interest and you start losing people. So a simple and direct business model eliminates customer and partner conflict in a very direct way, right? Companies that are supported through indirect models, for example, with advertising, have this fundamental conflict where the thing that their users want is a great experience, but the thing that the company wants is to be able to sell advertising or to sell data. And that sets up that conflict. Now the company has to serve two masters. Now there's a conflict of interest. Now the company has to figure out, well, they can't make the user experience too good because they have to be able to show ads. Users don't directly want the ads, but the company has to show it to make money. Now you've got a potential conflict. There's also a conflict with partners. For example, if we have a Evernote API platform with many great partners in Korea, about 25,000 developers in the Evernote API partner program right now, and we have no conflict of interest with any of our developers. We want our developers to create products that are so good that they take people's attention away from the Evernote apps. Right? Because what we found is the more engaged someone is with any Evernote app or any partner app, the more money we make. But if we were advertising supported, we would have this conflict. We would have to worry that somebody's going to make an app so good that it's going to take people's eyeballs away from Evernote, and then we would lose money. And that kind of a conflict with partners leads to a poor relationship with your partner program. So if you look at some of the difficulties that other big internet companies we've had with partners, it's because of this fundamental business model conflict, which we try to eliminate. So by eliminating short-term sources of revenue, we actually give up quite a bit of revenue, but we make it easy to build great products and have a great partnership base going forward. Next, is this idea that being a global company, doesn't mean what it used to. When I was starting out when I started my first company about 15 years ago, we really had to try very hard to be global, to set up offices in different places, to sell products in different places, and that's completely changed. If you have a company right now, if you start a company today, especially if it's a technology company or app company or service, but if you start a company today, congratulations, you're global. You're automatically a global company. In fact, you have to try really hard not to be. You have to specifically try if you don't want to be global, if you only want to be local. So every startup, every two-person startup is a global company. The only question is, do you want to be good at it? Do you want to actually understand that you're global by default and try to be good at it or not? But every company is fundamentally global because all of the obstacles of being a global company have been knocked down by smartphones, by app stores, by social media. Everyone in the world knows about the best products and can get them with almost no friction. And in fact, the very definition of what it means to be a global company has changed. In the past, being a global company used to mean that you sell your stuff all over the world. It doesn't mean that anymore. Being a global company today means that you make your products all over the world, that your products are inspired all over the world. It doesn't really matter where you sell them. And that's why Evernote is in Korea, and that's why we're in Tokyo and in Beijing and Zurich. We have 9 offices outside of the US, and we're in all of these offices. We make all these investments, not because we want to sell stuff to the local population. We're not in Korea because we want to make a product that's great for the Korean market. The Korean market is very big and it's very interesting, but that's not why we're here. We're in Korea because we want the best Korean talent. We want the best Korean designers and engineers and partners to help us make an Evernote that's so good that everyone in the world will want it. We're in Korea to take advantage of the talent and the creativity and the opportunity and the entrepreneurial spirit here to make something so good that everyone in the world wants it. We're not here to sell things to Koreans. Any company today that wants to be global needs to take advantage of all of the top global centers of innovation. And I think Korea is unquestionably one of the top global centers of design innovation and technical innovation, and that's why we want to be here. And the good news is that it's much easier than ever to be a global company as long as you actually take it seriously and think about it in these terms. Don't think about developing a product in one place and then having a sales team to take advantage of markets. Don't even think about markets. Just think about building and being inspired by the best that every top country has to offer. And the most important thing is this idea that most of the time that people talk about business, they use what's known as zero-sum language. They use zero-sum terminology. Most of the time that you hear business being talked about, people talk about it as if it was a sport or as if it was a military conflict or something. They use the language of war or the language of competitive sports to talk about business. This is very natural. In fact, it's rare to see any descriptions of business that aren't zero-sum terms. Zero-sum game is a game that means that for somebody to win, somebody else has to lose. There's only a fixed pie, a fixed prize, and if I take my share, then you don't have yours. That's how most people are trained to talk about business, and it's not actually like that. You don't have to play the zero-sum game. You don't have to think of business as a sport. You don't have to think about it as a war. Business isn't actually like boxing or like baseball. It is in small ways, but it's just as much like playing music. It's just as much like being in a symphony orchestra or a band. It's just as much like art or like literature as it is like sport. In fact, I think it's more like music than like sport. And if you think of it that way, if you don't think of it as a zero-sum game, a lot more stuff starts to make sense. For example, if you think of yourself as a musician instead of an entrepreneur, And people will ask, well, what about all the competition? What about all the other people who are also playing music? Well, what about them? Right? If it's not zero-sum, just because there's other people who are writing and playing music before you, that doesn't make you less interested to get into it. It makes you more interested. Right? The other musicians inspire you. Sure, I guess they're competitive in some way, but everyone can win together. Everyone forces each other to be good. Competition in music is about making everyone better to make a better experience. It's not about winning and losing. It's about succeeding. So at Evernote, we specifically refuse to play the zero-sum game. When we think about other companies, we don't think about competition. Thinking about competition is kind of useless, at least for a startup. At least for a startup in an industry that's not zero-sum. Maybe if we were in the oil drilling business, maybe it would be more of a zero-sum game because I guess there's only so much oil and, either we get it or our competitors do. But in the app business, it's not zero-sum. So when we think about companies, we think about what can we do together that would be great? How can we make a better experience for the world by working together? And the fact that some of our best partners are also our competitor doesn't matter. Every company overlaps a little bit. We don't focus on the negative aspects. We focus on the positive aspects. And it's a much happier way to live. In fact, Evernote is, like I said, is my third company. And if you combine all the companies that I've worked at, I think it's maybe my 8th, maybe my 9th job overall. And in all of my previous companies, in my 7 previous companies, we've always had an enemy. We've always had a main competitor, a nemesis, right? There's always been somebody in all my previous companies that we would focus on, and we would say, oh, it's those guys. We have to crush those guys. Those guys are our main enemy. And it never mattered in the end. The last 8 times, the company that we thought was our competitor didn't matter. That's not what determined the success or failure of the company. It was something else. It was execution, or it was just timing, or it was a competitor that we never even thought about. It was always somebody else. So 8 times we focused on competition and didn't get anywhere. At Evernote, we decided we're not going to think about it. So our best partners, the companies that we do the most work with, big companies, are companies like Samsung, Apple, Facebook, Microsoft, Amazon. All of those companies are our best partners, but all of them also compete with us in some way. And we don't worry about it. We don't think about the competition. We think about what we can do together. The way that this idea really manifests itself for entrepreneurs is this concept of disruption. As entrepreneurs, you've heard many, many times this idea of disruption, that new ideas disrupt. Right? There's conferences called Disrupt. Everything's about this concept of disruption, as if disruption is the goal. But disruption is not a goal. Disruption is a side effect of successful entrepreneurship. It's not the main point of it. People who think that when you're an entrepreneur, your main goal is to disrupt earlier industries miss the point completely. Because when you focus on disruption, it really makes it sound like the value that you create is equal to the value that you take away from somebody else. That you're just somehow moving value across. You're getting more of it yourself, but you're taking it away from older companies, older industries, because you're disrupting them. That's not that way at all. I mean, when people started making cars, when Ford really popularized automobiles, I mean, they disrupted the horse industry, but is the value that they created in the world equal to the value that they took away from carriage makers? Of course not, right? They made millions of times more value than they disrupted. This is true of every successful company. When Apple decided to get into the music business years ago, when they made the first iPod, they disrupted previous MP3 players. But is the value that they created equal to the value that they took away from their competitors? No, it was 100 times more. They created 100 times or 1,000 times more value than they eliminated. So because people tend to think of business as a sport, as a zero-sum game, they focus on this idea of disruption. But it doesn't have to be that way. So focus on creation, on creating value by yourself, with your partners, even with your competitors. And yeah, you'll disrupt some of them, and you'll cause companies to go out of business. But that's a side effect. It's almost an unfortunate side effect. It's not something that you should focus on. In fact, there was this article, this cover story in The Economist magazine. The Economist is very important to me. I subscribe to The Economist magazine because it's very important to me whenever I'm on an airplane to be seen reading The Economist. Right? I need people to see that I'm reading The Economist. It's kind of it's an important part of my image. That's why I subscribed to it for years. And recently on the cover, they had this cover called Survival of the Biggest, and there are these 4 monster squid fighting. It labeled Amazon, Facebook, Google, and Apple. 4 monster squid fighting with like 2 little guys watching. And I thought, wow, this looks like the world's stupidest cover. First of all, because I'm not actually sure that giant squid fight with each other. In fact, those may not actually be fighting. Maybe the little economist guys in the submarine are misunderstanding what the squid are actually doing. In fact, I think it's more likely that they're not fighting, that they're doing something else, because the history of these 4 companies in particular, Amazon, Facebook, Google, and Apple, have been not zero-sum at all. These companies have helped each other much more than they fought each other, directly and indirectly. But the whole internet industry came out of these companies and others, and and Microsoft and Samsung and many other companies, making an industry together. And sure, sometimes they compete, but there wouldn't be a successful iPhone without Google. They certainly wouldn't be Google being a success without the success of Apple. Facebook wouldn't have been anything without Google to build on. So the ecosystem is fundamentally cooperative, with the competition, with the zero-sum aspect being a small part of the story. The much bigger part of the story is how the companies make something great together. But that part of the story is never covered. So you see headlines, covers like this, even from a magazine as good as The Economist. But I urge you as entrepreneurs not to fall into this trap. Right? If you want to think of yourself as a giant monster squid, don't think of it as fighting with others. That's not actually what you're doing most of the time. All of this is leaning towards a way of saying that I really think that today, right now, is the best time in the history of the universe to be an entrepreneur, to start a company, because the technology world is becoming a meritocracy, right? A real meritocracy, where all you have to do is be good. And if you're really good, if you're the best at something, if you make a wonderful product, that's all you need to succeed. Now, chances are you're still going to fail. It's very difficult being an entrepreneur. But all of the things that used to be more important than the quality of the product aren't important anymore. 10 years ago, this was not true. 10 years ago, if you were going to make any product, the quality of your product was of some importance, but it was much more important to say, well, what are your channels? What are your logistics? What's your PR strategy? Who are your relationships with? All of that stuff was more important than the quality of the product to actually determine your success. At this point, it doesn't matter. If you have a great product, you get almost all the other stuff for free as a startup. Because of social media, everyone knows about you. Because of app stores, everyone can download your app. Because of smartphones and tablets and smart devices, everyone has these opportunities all the time. So the world is becoming much more of a meritocracy, which means that as an entrepreneur, if you ever have a choice to spend $1 on making your product better, or spend $1 on anything else, on marketing or anything, always choose to spend it to make the product better, because that is your best marketing, that is your best logistics, that's the best of everything you get from high-quality products. And people misunderstand me when I talk about meritocracy. They think that meritocracy somehow sounds like democracy, but it's not. It's quite difficult. In fact, a lot of people will ask me, well, you say the App Store is so great, but the App Store has almost 1 million apps on it. How is an average app, how can I, as an average developer, stand out in an App Store with 1 million apps? And my answer is, you can't. If you're the average developer, you suck. You don't deserve to stand out. If your goal is to be average, of course you're just going to get buried in with everyone else. But if you're excellent, and if all you do is focus on being excellent, you can succeed now where you couldn't even 5 years ago. We have versions of Evernote on every different platform. And because the world is a meritocracy, we don't strive for consistency. There's a quote that I really like from Emerson, which is, a foolish consistency is the hobgoblin of little minds. It means people who really don't have the talent to focus on more important things, focus on consistency. So we constantly get questions, well, how do you, why is the Android version of Evernote different from the Mac version or the iPhone version? The thing is, we don't try for consistency. Because I think if you strive for consistency, if you make consistency a point, you achieve it through mediocrity. The easiest way to make something consistent is to make everything equally sucky, right? To make everything kind of bad, to go with the lowest common denominator. And we reject that. So by focusing on the best possible quality on every device, every platform, every product, we try to go for excellence and not consistency. And the idea is consistency will become an emergent property once we've achieved excellence. Once every version of Evernote is really good, it'll seem like it's consistent just because that's how your brain works, even though it's actually totally different. Following along on this idea of alignment, I think it's important to realize that all great products aren't neutral. They have a point of view. If you look at a great product, you can see the point of view of the people who made them. Your product is a direct reflection of you. And don't try to hide that. Don't try to get away from it. The best way to think about this is this idea that you have a culture of design and a design of culture. You have to have a culture in your company that says the most important thing is the design, is the user experience. But in order to have that culture, you have to design it. So there's this loop, a culture of design, a design of culture. It means that we spend as much money at Evernote thinking about our lunch program in the office as we do thinking about features that we put into the product, because it's actually the same loop. Because measured over the lifetime of the company, the culture is the product. Right? If you're going to make a 100-year company, the culture is really your only job. My only real job as a CEO is to build the team and the culture. That's actually more important than even the current product, because the product is the current product. The culture, the team, is the next 1,000 products. That's the products for the next 100 years. So, in summary, because the world is a meritocracy, because you have all of these opportunities that you never had before, I really believe that now is the best time in the history of the universe to be an entrepreneur, as long as you're doing it for the right reason, to change the world a little bit. And if that's why you're doing it, if you want to build a 100-year company, if you want to change the world, there shouldn't be an exit strategy. Reject anything that talks about disruption, zero-sum game, or exit strategy. Because as entrepreneurs, you're building your life's work, and there is no exit strategy for your life's work. Thank you very much.